And we're going to talk to Humble and Fred coming up at 6:17. We will talk about Uber, which I'll comment on in a moment and read you a text and invite a call or two. I've got a text here from a listener saying that it's worth mentioning, he says, or she, the last time I was needing a cab in Toronto, I was refused by 3 different drivers before somebody would take me because they didn't drive where I wanted to go, from Molson Amphitheatre to Dundas, east of Yonge after a concert. And you do find this from time to time. Cabbies are on the way home, or they think a fare is too short, so they'll say no. Under the law, I think they're actually supposed to accept any fare that is out on the street. And the the listener who texts here says, "Cry me a river, taxi drivers, go Uber." I'll tell you, folks, 71010 again is where you send a text, and star talk is where you can call. We're happy to talk to you. My position on Uber is very simple, which is you can't cause the technology to go away. Why would you want the technology to go away? This is good technology that makes it more convenient for people to use paid ground transportation. Now, I've also said to Uber, well, we're not going to sort of try and make you disappear, which is what the cab industry somehow wants. At the same time, Uber can't operate in an unregulated fashion. That refers mostly to UberX. Because when you use Uber black cars or Uber taxis, these are existing licensed vehicles where the drivers have simply put the app on their phone. But this is something that just puts Toronto, in my view, into the 21st century, let alone the 20th. And I think our cab industry is still back in the 20th century, maybe the 20th century. I don't think the service is what it should be. I think you get these kind of situations like the person sending the text mentions, in terms of drivers who say, sorry, I'm not going where you're going. You have far too many drivers when you get in and say, take me to such and such a place, and they have no idea what you're talking about. And I just think they have a lot of work to do providing people with the quality of service that they have the right to expect. And in Uber's case, they've got to understand that, yes, you can compete. Competition and choice are a good thing for people, but you've got to compete within the context of some regulations so that it's fair to cab drivers and to people in the cab industry. It's not fair to have the cab industry paying license fees and having requirements with regard to insurance and so on, which are meant to protect public safety, and not to have Uber operating on something similar in terms of having rules with regard to insurance that are clear and rules with regard to driver safety checks which are clear and this kind of thing. I think in the end, the changes to the regulation that will come about, and by the way, in other cities, that's what they're doing. They're reviewing all of their regulations. I think this will end up being good for people. I think it could pull fares down because Uber fares are cheaper all the time. I think it could do a lot of things that make people have better choice and better, and equal protection. Equal protection, meaning in terms of the insurance and the safety. This is John Tory filling in for John Moore on Moore in the Morning. Humble and Fred coming up. Can we talk about Uber for a minute? It's in the news, and I've just made my views known a couple of minutes ago, and I'm not, I just think Uber is here to stay, and we should welcome technology like this. We have MPP Michael Harris in the Ontario legislature saying maybe we should get through this whole sort of schmozzle with court cases and this and that and have the province regulate it, since it also oversees auto insurance. Do you think it's time for the province to step in and regulate Uber?
Well, I think it's time for somebody to step in and set some rules that everybody can be somewhat satisfied with, because this just seems to be an ongoing issue that won't go away. And you got to feel bad for the established taxi cabs and those who have bought licenses and what have you. So, yeah, something's got to be done.
Well, and Howard, I do say exactly that, which is that what this has to lead to, there's a court case on today. I have no idea why they're protesting. The city is in court seeking an injunction because they're operating unregulated. But the end result has to be a new set of regulations that take account of the fact Uber does exist, and so do taxis, and they have to be fairly and equitably regulated.
Have you had the opportunity to use Uber?
I have. I've used the black car only and the taxi service, not the UberX.
Well, I got to tell you, I used it a couple weekends ago all over downtown Toronto, several different stops. And I got to tell you, it really was something else. And so, yes, I agree with Fred when he says, I feel bad for guys because taxi licenses are expensive, and those people that work cabs, men and women that do it. But as far as regulating Uber, how do you regulate if I want to give Fred a gift for taking me for a ride somewhere? Because that's kind of what the app is. You're basically giving someone a remuneration for having given you a ride.
But that's like Airbnb. This is the way of the future a bit, in that I think a lot of younger people in particular, and those with precarious employment, are using their home, they're using their car as a means of making a buck or two, I have no problem. That's called entrepreneurship. It's called, small business. But it has to be done in a way that is regulated equitably with the taxis.
One of the first questions I asked Howard after he had used this service was insurance. When you get in that car, where do you stand from an insurance standpoint? Where does the driver stand? Where do you stand?
Exactly.
Well, wouldn't I stand the same? Listen, if I picked you guys up on the way to a hockey game, you're a passenger in my car under my insurance.
But not getting paid. That's the difference,
That's
Howard.
the
is
thing.
that
And
it's
you know
not
what insurance companies are like. If they, scratch under the surface and get a little more detail, what position are you put in?
Although I would say, Fred, it's probably fair to say if Humble picked me up on a way to a hockey game, he saw me on the street, knowing who it was, he'd probably suggest that I should pay.
Wait a minute.
Absolutely.
Humble pick you up? What, are you on Tinder?
First of all, he wouldn't pick me up. He'd roll the window down and sort of say, "Good luck, sucker. I hope you're not getting too wet in the rain."
Really
and then
funny.
if I said, please pick me up humbly, he'd say, "Okay, for $25, I'll take you to the hockey game."
I just called the mayor of Toronto, dude. If I saw you on the street, I'd make you pay before you got in.
Better a dude than the other D word.
Yeah.
Yep. And if you ever get to the stage where you're thinking of calling me the other D word as mayor, then call me and I'll come on and explain myself.
No, it's fine.
I hope you guys have a terrific day. What we're going to do is we're going to talk Uber, and there's a big protest going on today by the taxi drivers, which I think is largely a waste of their time and, frankly, just victimizing people who are not involved in this dispute at all. There is a court case on today, by the way, where your City of Toronto government is taking Uber to court, saying they're not regulated, and they should be regulated, and they shouldn't be operating outside of regulation. But we're going to have Michael Harris on, the MPP, and he's going to talk about his plans to have provincial regulation there. Want to hear from you. 416-872-1010, Star Talk 8255. You know the numbers. And we'll take those calls after we interview Michael Harris at around 5 minutes to 7 o'clock and find out what you think about this. I'll put my view one more time. I believe that Uber has to be regulated. They can't operate like it's the Wild West. But at the same time, we should welcome technology like this that makes it convenient and better for people to get around the city. And I think the taxi cab industry have a lot of work to do before they start protesting other people, getting themselves in the game in terms of being people that provide better service to people, more affordable service. And I think, by the way, cab drivers have a heck of a time trying to make a living. They really, really do. But that's, can't be camouflaged by the fact that we've got to get them providing better service. And I think by doing so, they will make a better living. By having Uber fairly regulated, they will make a better living. And the public, most importantly, will have better service. Anyway, you let us know what your view is at Star Talk 8255, 416-872-1010. John Tory filling in for John Moore. We're talking Uber. We're going to have Michael Harris, the MPP, on after we check on traffic and the weather. But we did invite your calls, as I do, because we're going to take more before the news at 7. Star Talk 8255, 416-872-1010. Let's go to Keith in Toronto. You're on News Talk 1010. How you doing, Keith?
I'm doing great. Thank you for taking my call, Mayor Tory.
So what's your thought on Uber and how we should deal with it and the taxi protest today?
Well, I just think the taxis protesting is akin to retail stores protesting online sales. It's going to happen. It has taken away business, obviously, from the retailers. This is going to take away business from them, but they have to figure a better way to market themselves. Maybe it's less expensive. Maybe it's a better service, whatever it might be. But we cannot continue to complain about technology. It is going to be there. We need to accept it. We need to, embrace it and move forward with it.
I think you're right about that, Keith, and I thank you very much for the call. I tend to think what happens oftentimes is that those that have been caught a bit short by new technology then try to sort of forge defensive actions of one kind or another to sort of ward it off while they try and catch up. And, I understand that. I've been in business. I mean, when you get caught short by a competitor or by some new technology coming in and disrupting your industry, your reaction is to be defensive as opposed to saying, no, we got to hunker down here and do much better for people and we'll be the winning choice and we'll survive over time. Michael Harris, the PC MPP, coming up. And we will, of course, talk about Uber because it's one of the topics du jour today with a big protest coming up downtown. Hundreds of cabs around City Hall. I don't know what they're protesting exactly because the city's in court today seeking an injunction against Uber so that we can have fair competition. But maybe the courts aren't the best way to deal with this, and that's why we've brought on Michael Harris, the provincial MPP for the Conservatives, who has a motion in front of the legislature to say maybe the province should take a hand in regulating Uber. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, John. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a bit about what you have in mind as to how we could better handle the Uber issue as opposed to what we see going on now.
Sure. Well, we all know that technology is involving the way we go about our daily lives. Consumers are demanding more efficient, affordable, reliable, and enjoyable means of travel, and that's why apps like Uber have become so popular throughout the province, especially in the city of Toronto. And so as legislators, we must also recognize the fact that as technology evolves, so should our laws evolve with it. And so last week I tabled a motion calling on the province to bring forward legislation to allow for ride sharing right across the province, basically establishing basic ground rules or a baseline framework, but still allow for the municipality to have some flexibility. Avoid that patchwork from one community to another. Just simply allow for it to exist right across the province.
Now, I have a text here. I'm just trying to find it, but I can tell you roughly what it said because I read it a few minutes ago. There's a lot of them coming in, and I thank you very much for that at 7:10:10 to the listeners. And it sort of said, look, why get the province involved in this? Let the municipalities and let the free market kind of decide how things should go, and why do we need the provincial government intervening in more things? How do you respond to that?
Well, I'm all for the free market. As I said here, for example, provincial ride-sharing legislative framework for cities in Ontario could, for instance, mandate vehicle inspections for all TNC vehicles or put at least a maximum age of a vehicle, say 10 years, but then still allow for the municipality to fill in the specifics. They could come back and say, no, we want 8 years. So, this is happening, in 22 U.S. states. Across the United States that allows for TNCs to operate. So should the same be in Ontario? In fact, there are several pieces of legislation that would impact ride sharing, whether it be the Highway Traffic Act or, as we all know, the insurance industry is regulated by the province, and there may be changes that would be required there. So I see this as a partnership, but and it won't happen overnight. But it's something that the province should. They talked about it in their budget about a sharing economy. I call it the new economy, but it's here to stay, and so we have to evolve with the reality of it happening.
Do you hear anything about this in other industries? I know your constituency is down Kitchener way, and Airbnb, Uber may not be down there to the same extent, but certainly Airbnb, I suspect, is in most cities in Ontario where people can rent out rooms in their houses to people who otherwise might be staying in hotels. Do you hear from the hotels saying, we're regulated, they're not, and, raising concerns about that?
Well, not so much, but John, you're right. I do come from the region of Waterloo, which is known as the Silicon Valley of the North, home of the BlackBerry, of course, where we invent technology, but we also embrace it. And so, I call it the new economy, but it's something that, as your last caller stated, it's here to stay. And so government has a responsibility to protect its citizens, but at the same time, not put in, restrictive regulation that would prevent folks like this from operating. And that's why, you may want to call it smart regulation to ensure that this is happening. In fact, Kansas is a great example of how their legislators put in laws to govern ride sharing. It was too prescriptive. Companies pulled out. Consumers demanded their politicians to get back to the table, work together. They've created something that works, and ride sharing now exists in the state of Kansas. And so that could happen here in the province. In fact, it likely will in the city of Toronto. So
you mentioned something very interesting, which, of course, is the reaction of the traveling public, who are really who we should be all concerned about here. I mean, the cab industry seem to be concerned about themselves and Uber concerned about themselves, whereas I'm trying very hard in order to produce a balanced regulatory system to focus on the users. There are 150,000 of them in Toronto, and while that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a fair regulatory system, it does mean you have to sort of focus on consumer choice. Have you heard any reaction to your motion you're going to put forward from the traveling public?
Absolutely. I've had, of course, you get both sides, as you know, John, but, the reason why apps like this have been so popular is because consumers, are demanding, a more efficient, affordable, reliable, and enjoyable means of travel. They just simply want to get to point A to point B, and they shouldn't have to struggle. I read that in February alone, there were 500,000 Uber rides in the city of Toronto. That's significant, and so, this consumer demand have prompted, this advance in technology to provide a service that quite evidently people want. And so, it's our responsibility as technology evolves to evolve our legislation. And as they always say, if you don't bring in a new model, the old one will always exist. And perhaps that old model is something that consumers are not happy with, and they're driving this.
Michael Harris, provincial Conservative MPP, thanks very much for your